Hello, such a pleasure to be here. My name is Charles Michel, and I'm here to talk today about maybe the topic of the decade, if not the topic of the century. We are a pretty special emergence, right? Human life in general on this planet is truly something unique. When we look at life from a cosmic perspective, from a universal perspective, we are so special, right? And at the same time, so complex. And at the same time, when we think, and go back to the human world, to the human kind of collective mind, there's so much complexity going on and so many problems. And right now we are at risk. So what is this topic of the century that I mentioned? Well, we live in this very fragile ecosystem, this beautiful planetary orb hanging in space, traveling around the sun at 220 kilometers per second. And this, limited amount of life that we're able to harness and to live is actually something that is intimately connected to food. Like life emerged in a primordial soup, probably around 3.84 billion years ago. And what was the first kind of mechanism of life? It was cells kind of sensing the chemical environments in which they were swimming, right? To capture energy, to capture nutrients. That is something very similar to degustation, to taste. Taste mechanisms are very much molecular mechanisms that allow us to probe our environments. And, if it's good for us, if it tastes good, if it's pleasurable, we swallow. If it's not, we spit, right? So the taste mechanisms are very much a very, very old sense, maybe the oldest of all senses. So that is how life kind of emerged on this planet, right? Life is energy and nutrients in motion. We are water-based kind of bodies, matrices of life, where energy, right? Physical energy, electrons, condensed forms of energy, and nutrients move in order to give rise to consciousness, which is, arguably the medium with which we're interacting with right now. One of the first food philosophers, Jean-Antoine Brillat-Savarin, in the 19th century said that the universe is nothing without the things that live in it, and everything that lives eats. We are a cooking species. We are the cooking species, the only one that, from an evolutionary perspective, has been able to harness fire. Fire is our most primal technology. Fire made us human, and cooking food over fire is what made us human. This is actually the cooking hypothesis put forward by Rich and Wrangham, right? And something special happened when we started harnessing fire. We started cooking food, started extracting more nutrients out of food that we were able to harness from our environment, and our brains grew bigger and our guts grew smaller, and we had more free time. Instead of chewing all day long, like our cousins, the primates, do, we were able to have free time to develop language, develop music, to develop social structures, and really the birth of culture happened with fire. We are the apes, the creatures of the flame. What are the implications of this when we think about designing a better future for all life, not just for human civilization? I'm talking about civilization. Let's just remember where we come from. About 1,000 years ago, 8,000, 10,000 years ago, we kind of think that, and not only in the Fertile Crescent here in the Middle East, but also in other parts of the world, in the American continent, in the Asian continent, there was something unique that happened, which is agriculture. And we all agree that agriculture kind of was the base of human civilization. When we started, we stopped being kind of nomadic and following the seasons, following the rains, following animal herds to feed ourselves. We actually kind of started establishing ourselves in one place, became sedentary thanks to agriculture. But something new came up in science. A discovery in Göbekli Tepe, this really special kind of archaeological site, is understanding. This discovery is changing the understanding, our understanding of the birth of civilization. What happened there? There's this settlement, right? Arguably a tiny little village, tiny city, where the infrastructure, in particular the temples that are there, predates agriculture. What does that mean? That before agriculture, we were actually having places to gather where there was a common, a shared belief system. Today, we have many very many different belief systems that shape how we interact, our rituals, our songs, our myths, and etc. But think about this. We think that agriculture made its civilization, but it's actually a belief system that allowed people to be together and then create agriculture. What does that mean? What does that tell you about the importance of shared belief systems when it comes to, civilization at its root? And then after, thousands of years of this kind of civilization that emerged, in particular, one became really interesting, which is the Roman Empire, of course, about 2,000 years ago, creating the first instance of a globalized trade market. What did we trade back then? Food. It was all about food. Food was the basis to create the monetary system. Even, salary comes from the word salt, right? And because salt had such a high value at some point for food preservation, we used salt for preserving. So hence it had a huge value. Nowadays, that value has gone elsewhere. The city emerged. The large cities, the way we understand today, in particular, this is a photo of the center of London. What was at the center of our cities? Food, right? Cows, cheese, chicken, and all kinds of vegetables, right? All this food that was there to feed our cities. With the advent of the steam engine and kind of, let's say, the fossil fuel epoch, we started growing faster and faster because we could move food faster and faster on this planet. So we industrialized nature. That's what we've done in the past 2 million years as a species. From starting with fire, now we are at a point where our house is on fire, right? And we basically still kind of rooted in this very old biology that is based on a scarcity mindset, where we try to kind of be safe and eat more than we need sometimes. That is kind of our evolutionary biology. We haven't yet adapted from a biological standpoint to the realities of living in a planet of plenty. And because we live in a planet of plenty right now, but we are overeating, we are overconsuming, infinite growth does not work on a finite planet. We all know this, right? And this is the science that tells us, right? The history that tells us. I think it's important to understand where we go. So let me tell you a little bit of my background. So I am a chef. I studied culinary arts. I worked in Michelin star restaurants. And quickly I understood that the power of food was underutilized in the restaurant. And also I wasn't too comfortable with the fact that, the best foods were only for highly privileged people. So started kind of working outside of the restaurant as kind of an artist, working with food as a medium and the meal table as a medium to communicate messages, to communicate ideas, to make us think about important topics, right? And today we are living kind of a fundamental point. And so turning point, right? We hopefully will be able to reduce our carbon emissions. And I'm pretty sure some of the audience will know, but for those who don't, food is the #1 contributor to carbon emissions. We hear Project Drawdown, and something that really, really inspired me when I first saw Project Drawdown solutions is that of the 20 most impactful solutions to reach drawdown, there are 8 that are connected directly to food. 8 out of the top 20. And if you think about things like, land use is also connected to food and to agricultural land, right? So the most comprehensive plan to climate change includes food. This is why I say that food is maybe the topic of the decade and the century. So how do we unite around the food science? Not just around the science, but around the food science, especially because I think that food is kind of a Trojan horse, right? It smells good, it's beautiful, it talks about culture, it's about community, it's about our identities, and it is pleasurable, right? So how can we make food a solution to inspire more solutions and to inspire behavior change? How do we change our mindsets around food on a massive scale? How can we do that? And we know that individual decision-making is going to play a fundamental role to this change. So here's a few ideas that I want to bring as solutions, all inspired by science. What if, living in a world of plenty, what if we were able to reduce food waste? So 8% of global carbon emissions, which is that's kind of 2 to 3 times more than all aviation combined. 8% of carbon emissions are food waste. They're literally food that we produce and throw away, right? So what does it mean how can we do to reduce waste? So we need to change our minds. First of all, let's take a broccoli. We eat the broccoli, which is a flower, right? But have you ever seen a plant of broccoli? The plant of broccoli is like flower. There's the stem and there's a bunch of leaves. I would say that the flower is about 10 to 15% of the weight of this plant. And it's the only thing that is considered food. The rest is not considered food, but it is perfectly edible. And I'm not sure if you've had the chance to taste like the leaves of a broccoli or a cauliflower. They're absolutely crunchy, delicious, just like kale, right? And they're full packed with nutrients. And we don't even consider food. They don't even enter in the food waste count. What do we mean that we could eventually increase the yield of this particular crop, broccoli or cauliflowers, from just eating the flower to eating all the plants, right? Would increase its yield maybe 400, 500%. And we're trying to solve kind of, with biotechnology, trying to increase the yields of 5, 10% of certain crops by hacking genes, when we can just like logically use food that is already available. So that's one way to reduce food waste. But also, I think a big part of the food waste actually happens in our households. How do we do that? How do we change our understanding? It needs to come through education, right? We need to educate the masses. We need to educate kids. We need to educate everyone to understand how to reduce this food, how to preserve. But also, there's a very important aspect, is that how we connect with food, right? What is the meaning of food for us? Is food just a commodity, something that doesn't matter if it's wasted, or something that we really care about deeply, right? And another thing in particular to food waste is that we need policy innovation. We need to innovate in policy making in order to especially reframe the food supply and decentralize eventually production and supply chains in a way, maybe using blockchain, in a way that allows us to reduce the amount of food waste that goes just lost in transportation and in refrigeration. Another aspect that is fundamental, what if all humanity adopted the planetary diet, right? We've heard about this, and it's such a great solution from a climate science perspective, but also on a health science perspective. But we love meat so much, right? So I think it's very important here to change the narrative. I did a paper at Oxford University. I was shadow resident for 3 years at the Experimental Psychology Department of Oxford, doing research on the senses, trying to understand how we make our decisions and our behaviors, also our belief systems, based on information from our senses. So one particular experiment we ran was about trying to convince someone to adopt insects into their diets. We used 3 different arguments. One argument was, this is good for the planet, you should be eating insects because it's good for the planet. The other argument was, this is good for you, this is very healthy, right? You should be eating insects. And the other argument, of course, we had a control condition, but the third argument was, other people are eating this, you should try it. And it was surprising to find that the actual hedonic, the pleasure of the food that we were giving our kind of subjects to taste, the pleasure that they got from the food changed depending on the argument that we use. When we used health arguments, people expected it to be less sweet and hence perceived it as being sweet, hence less pleasurable, hence they weren't as likely to adopt it into their diets. The best condition, the best experimental condition was actually other people are doing, the social condition. So that also meant the pleasure of the food that we were giving people was higher. People enjoyed the food more because they had a different argument. So this just gives us a bit of an insight from experimental kind of psychology on what are the best arguments to convince people to eventually adopt a plant-rich diet. We need to do it through pleasure. We need to create movements, and we need to be careful of polarization, because this is not a war between those who eat meat and are vegan, the kind of carnivorous, and those who don't eat. We don't need more polarization. Food shouldn't be a topic that polarizes us. We should be celebrating both the plant world and the animal world, but give a higher place and higher reverence to the animal world, because it is so costly in terms of water, of resources, of course, carbon emissions, but also celebrating the culture that comes with us being kind of the shepherds of all these animals that are on the planet. And like, there's a big ethical conundrum around it as well. Also, I think advertisement will play a role here, very important. And of course, we need innovating policies also that regulate the amount of food images of high carbon, high kind of water use products to be advertised. And we published a paper on brain and cognition in 2015, showing just how much food images, virtual food, influences decision making and hence our health. Very recently, there's actually a very interesting law that was passed in the UK around kind of controlling the advertisement of high sugar and high sweet foods. So we're getting there, but we need to scale up those solutions. And we also need to eat real food. We need to connect with people, with our identities. Good food also should not be a privilege. Sustainable food nowadays, regenerative foods are very much privileged. It's more expensive. How do we create eventually, what if instead of doing universal basic income, we created a program that would actually be cheaper of universal basic nutrition, where everybody would have the basic nutrients, healthy, well-curated nutrients to feed the population by reducing food waste, for instance. I think there's a direct connection there. Also, I think we need to be wise. We need to bring in philosophy, right? What does it mean to be wiser with food? Well, eating less of better ingredients and being grateful and eating slowly and taking time to put food back where it belongs, which is at the center of our families, at the center of our lives, at the center of our cities, and really kind of understanding that food is the most intimate connection we have with our environments. We cannot solve the climate crisis without solving the broken food system. It is maybe the first step that we need to do in order to address global hunger, in order to address all the kind of public health issues that are caused by food. We need to rethink food. Eating, cooking, designing foods for industry is a political act. And something I feel is really empowering is to think that these votes that we give on a daily basis for food is much more powerful, much more direct than voting at the polls every 4, 5, or 6 years. Think about it. You are voting with your money for a particular organization of the food system. Every single plate of food that we consume has an environmental and a social balance, an impact, right? So we must understand this. We must make it known, right? We also to kind of be part of this regeneration. Regeneration meaning the species that protects life, not only ours, but all life. So it's the only way. By that, I mean also maybe we could, evolve from Homo sapiens sapiens to Homo regenesis. What would it mean if we would actually really take on that responsibility as a species, as a collective, or the whole planet, planetary life? And we have to stop kind of wasting time. I think one of the things we need to act quick and strongly using the science, and not only the food science about kind of food safety, but also flavor science, taste science, right? Leveraging umami, right, to make plant-based foods more attractive, because we are addicted to umami from birth, from mother's milk. We are addicted to sugar and to umami, which is glutamate, which is an indicator of the presence of proteins in foods, right? This is taste science. All the knowledge is there. Books have been published for 15, 10 years. We need to bring that to develop kind of a wiser approach to food. And also, I'm going to end with this. It strikes me as just mind-boggling that being the only species that cook, being the only species that control fire, we teach kids, we teach humans in theory at schools, the basics of what it means to be a human, of all the tools you need to be a good human and to live a good life. And we are not teaching anything or very little about food at schools. We grow up to 17, 18 years old and we're completely food illiterate. We live in a mostly food illiterate world. What would it mean to, with the same impetus that we've been teaching all humanity to read and write, because it is empowering, what if we teach everybody to cook? We would educate the more intelligent consumers of the future, and we could also make education much more fun, much more delicious, right? I call this gastrophysics, right? The discipline, the overarching discipline that basically includes all different fields of food science that could be taught, and teaching history, teaching culture, teaching physics, chemistry, mathematics, economics, everything with food and having a good meal at the end. I really think that would be seeding the future, thinking about a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago. We're obsessed with 2030. We need to think 2050. We need to think, 100 years from now. And we must educate a more intelligent consumer that is more in tune with their senses to make better decisions, because we are driven by pleasure. We are driven by beauty, right? Morten Krinkelbach of Oxford University says that pleasure is the most, it's the most clever kind of trick of evolution. And this is all for all life, not only for humans. So if the evolution that is needed today in terms of our consumption and our food system has to happen, it will be delicious. It's the only way. It has to be beautiful, it has to be artistic, it has to be with beautiful narratives and beautiful words that makes us understand that food is life. And because it is life, whatever your belief system is, food is sacred. And we must connect with that knowledge. If you ask our elders in indigenous communities, they have many, many answers on how to make food, again, a center of our rituals, and food become really the umbilical cord that connects us to the planet. So these insights that I just shared are actually part of a 10-point manifesto that is the guide to conscious eating that we created with people from all over the world and translated into over 20 languages. 10 points that can help us to eat more consciously, right? To be more aware of the power of food. We know it now, right? The science is clear. We just need to really make it kind of resound all over and transversally through all level, all ages, all sectors, is that the destiny of our species is in everyone's mouth. What we put in here, right? The door to the temple of our bodies, right? It's all about how we eat, and that the positive evolution of humanity and the planet depends on our diets. Thank you very much.